Hello everyone, I am Bavita Rai, a partner at Weightmans, and I sit on the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Committee as the National Gender Equality Lead. Thank you very much for joining Stephanie and me today to mark International Women's Day 2021. I am very excited to have the Vice President of the Law Society, Stephanie Boyce, as our guest. When I was considering potential guest speakers, for me, it was a no-brainer to ask Stephanie. Stephanie is making history. She will be, in October of this year, the 177th, the 6th female, and the first person of colour to become the president of the Law Society. Welcome, Stephanie, and thank you so much for taking part to mark International Women's Day. I want to start off by asking you, what does International Women's Day mean to you?
Well, firstly, may I say thank you for inviting me. What International Women's Day means is it's a day that globally we come together to celebrate the achievements, discuss, advocate, and take the call forward as to gender equality, to recognise the achievements that women, the achievements and contributions that women have made in society, in our profession, and it gives us an opportunity to celebrate with colleagues as well as highlight the inequalities that still exist around gender inequality.
Totally agree. I mean, for me, every day is International Women's Day, but you're absolutely right. A reminder of the progress that has been made, a reminder of what more needs to be done, a call to action in order to achieve parity and equality. Stephanie, I am fascinated by your journey. What was your journey like to get to where you are today? Any obstacles, challenges on the way? And what advice would you give to people as a result of this experience?
Well, my advice, if we start with the advice first, my advice is to everyone is the same, and it's simple. Never, ever give up. Four times it took me to become Deputy Vice President of the Law Society of England and Wales. And once you're elected as Deputy Vice President, as I was in July 2019, when I took office, it's then a 3-year trajectory until you become President. So quite rightly, as you've already said, I will become the 177th, the 6th female, and the first person of colour to become President of the Law Society of England and Wales in its history. A remarkable achievement. And my story is one of resilience and determination, and a burning desire to push, to persevere until something happened. So from around about the age of 7, a young age, I wanted to become a lawyer. But coming from a low socioeconomic background, as I did, growing up in a single parent household on a council estate, I didn't know any lawyers, wasn't quite clear as to the path I needed to take. And then at the age of 12, I went to live in America. My family and I emigrated to America. And I think it's fair to say that America would have a lasting impression upon me. I would be overwhelmed by the poverty, the injustices, people struggling to exercise their rights because of the colour of their skin. And for me, I'm absolutely clear that legal rights mean absolutely nothing if you don't know when those rights are being taken away, or you don't know how to enforce those rights. So, as I say, America would set me onto the path of a career for law. I would return to the United Kingdom, England, to study law in 1991. But I faced a number of barriers. My American qualification wasn't recognised at that time with a British institution, so I had to do an access to higher qualification route. I did that part-time. That enabled me then to go on to university. And I started university, London Guildhall, in 1996, February 1996, part-time, whilst working for British Rail. And by September 1996, I had enrolled full-time. So after leaving London Guildhall in 1999, I went on to the College of Law, Guildford, to do the legal practice course. And I subsequently qualified as a solicitor in 2002. So I'm absolutely clear that every detour, every delay, every twist, every turn has got me to where I am today, as I sit here as Vice President of the Law Society of England and Wales.
Thank you. So my takeaway from that is have a goal, a belief, and clearly resilience and determination play a huge part. I have to
Absolutely.
say, when I look at myself, the younger Bavita, I don't think she had that resilience, the self-belief that I now have. I was fortunate that I had the guidance and the support network to build my confidence and my resilience. So would you say having that support network certainly helps as well?
It helps, and that's why I'm keen on teaching law in schools, because lots of us who come from there are lots of us, depending on our background, depending on our networks. I'm absolutely clear that through my networks I have got to where I am today. But if you don't know anyone in law, you've not been exposed to that, as I was only exposed to those individuals on television. You don't know how to go about, what roadmap you have to lay in order to have a successful or to indeed enter the legal profession. So my reasoning for teaching law in schools is twofold. One is about access to justice, and for the reasons I've already amplified, about legal rights, and knowing what your rights are, and how to enforce those rights. And of course, we've seen great encroachment upon our rights as the government has legislated in order to deal with the pandemic that we find ourselves in. But also one of social mobility. Because if we start to teach law in schools from a young age, individuals start to learn about their rights. And as I say, that's about access to justice. But they also start to break down some myths, some barriers about the law being a profession that's not for them. Doesn't look like me, doesn't sound like me. It starts to break that down, and individuals start to learn from an early age what is the stepping stones, the roadmap that they have to lay in order to get into law, and thrive in law, in the legal profession, and stay in the legal profession.
Thank you. The next question is about time to change. We hear it again and again. It seems to me that we have been talking about it being time to change in relation to D&I within the workplace for a long, long time. Why do you think it is taking so long, and what can we or businesses do to move the dial more quickly?
I think there are a number of factors. We have, let's be clear, there has been progress made in creating a more diverse profession, but barriers remain, and barriers remain more so if you happen to be a woman, and if you happen to be from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background, disabled, or from or an LGBT plus person, coupled with coming from a low socio-economic background. And the pandemic, of course, has increased inequalities, and people are becoming impatient for change. The abhorrent events that happened early last year around George Floyd's death in America, the subsequent Black Lives Matter movement, has shone a light on the inequalities, the structural inequalities that exist. So it's clear that there is a business case for diversity, and that is stronger than ever before, especially as we find ourselves, as I say, in the pandemic. But research shows, in addition to that businesses are more profitable and better positioned to be more resilient, adaptive, and innovative to meet the new challenges we're all facing, if they are diverse and inclusive. And the legal profession has both a moral and a business imperative to ensure that the ability, that the only determinant must be skills, aptitude, and ability, not your background, not your sexuality, age, religion, gender, or anything else that should decide whether you can enter this profession, thrive in this profession, and stay in this profession.
I've been in the profession for almost 25 years, and I have seen that there is now an appetite and awareness that was not there when I came into the profession around D&I. But I suppose from my view, if D&I initiatives are to succeed, then they need to be given the same importance as business imperative initiatives. And I would even go as far as to say, look, you've got to have targets, set targets, because as we know in this profession, what gets measured gets done. And I suppose a final point on this for me is we cannot underestimate, in terms of moving that dial quickly, is the importance of a strong, consistent message from the leadership on its commitments to D&I. You talk about impatience, you're absolutely right. I'm one of them. I'm impatient now because I feel the time has come to live it by actions, because we've talked about it long enough. So words alone, it's just not acceptable anymore.
Well, absolutely. What I would say is that the Law Society doesn't favour quotas because, you know, in some instances that could amount to positive discrimination. But we absolutely do favour targets. And we have seen a number of firms who have set out targets as to what they wish to achieve in terms of diversity and inclusion. And we absolutely welcome that.
Thank you. As a person of colour working in a predominantly white male legal sector, have you ever been tempted to change who you are, how you act in the workplace in order to fit in? What would be your advice to those entering the profession and having to consider this decision?
There is much talk about, you know, whether or not you are able to bring your true, authentic self to work, especially if you come from a diverse background, and wondering how you may be perceived because of that background. However, authenticity is important. It's important that we feel able to bring our true authentic self to work, able to tell our story. But like any setting, you know, certain behaviors, certain behaviors belong in certain places, and are appropriate for home, but possibly not appropriate for the office, and vice versa. So my advice is to act the part you want to become, you know, with integrity, and be true to yourself. And that is to do things successful lawyers do and act the way successful lawyers act. And you'll stand a very good chance of becoming successful also. So to answer the question, absolutely. Have I had to change? Have I had to adapt? Yes, in some instances, but I've also taken a view. I was interviewed a while back, and somebody said to me, why do you tell your story? Why do you tell your story about, growing up on a council estate, coming from a single parent family, low socioeconomic background, and the fact that it took me 4 attempts to become deputy vice president. That is my badge. I'm not ashamed. I'm not embarrassed. That is my story. That is my authenticity.
Thank you, that's fantastic. I have to say as well, I'm seeing a change is happening, a change for the better with those, certainly with the younger generation coming in and those entering the profession, challenging the status quo. And it has to be diversity and authenticity as a package and not divorced from one another.
Absolutely.
I read in one of your interviews you saying, and I love this, my election is likely to impact how potential candidates are perceived in the future when they think what leaders should look like. Can you elaborate what you mean by this and the message you want to share with those that are either entering the profession, those that are in the profession, and business leaders?
Absolutely. So new research has revealed Britain's perceptions of those working in the legal industry. And it highlights a misconception when it comes to diversity and representation. So the study was undertaken by the University of Law, and it revealed that nearly half, 48% of the British public picture someone who works in the legal profession to be white, with just over 10%, 12% saying they picture a person of Black or ethnic minority background. And if you take that research into account, so being being a Black woman I am not representative of the public's concept of what a legal professional should look like, let alone to reach the top of my profession, as I will ascend to shortly. So the research is a stark reminder that more needs to be done to redefine what someone working in the legal industry can look like. And it is no longer a profession solely for the few, but in fact, it's accessible to all. So that's exactly what I was meaning in terms of what we've mentioned before. I am the first Black office holder, the first person of colour who will become president later this year.
And I suppose it gives that belief, the art of the possible, that if you can get there, so they can also get there and be in these senior leadership positions.
Absolutely. And if I can add, when we were doing hustings, which of course is where, you go, the candidates go, there were 4 candidates vying to become deputy vice president, and we had to give a speech, and we were subjected to questions from council members. And somebody asked a question, as I remember it, and the question was, if you are successful in becoming deputy vice president, how will you promote equality, diversity, and inclusion? And the night before, we had been given a report. And in that report, it gave me every statistic, every reason why, as a woman, a Black woman of colour, that I was the least likely to succeed in the legal profession, the solicitor profession. So I had all those statistics going around in my head, and I was the second to answer. I'd written the word "smile" in big capital letters on my paper before hustings had started, and I looked at my paper and I looked out at my cohort of colleague council members, and I said, "How?" with a big smile, "How am I going to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion? I'm going to role model it. I'm going to be visible." Because quite rightly, if you cannot see it, you cannot be it.
The next question is about trainees, and it's a question from a trainee solicitor.
Yep.
And he says, trainees have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic compared to more senior members of the legal profession, as remote learning is significantly harder than in-person or office learning. Now, I know from expertise, just from experience, how much I learned as a trainee, as a junior solicitor, just by listening to more senior colleagues, getting their advice because they were just around the corner, I could just speak to them, and even hearing them simple things like on the phone. What is your advice to the senior team members on how to make it easier for trainees to develop and learn in this new environment?
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear that the pandemic has made a different working and learning experience, to the current cohort compared to previous cohorts. But senior team members should ensure the quality of training that is received by trainees is not diminished by remote working, and that they are provided with a broad range of opportunities to continue to learn and develop. And communication is key. And you must communicate regularly and effectively. So my advice to senior team members is to be flexible, be communicative, be responsive. And with a move to less face-to-face interaction, thought needs to be given as to what trainees and staff may have missed working more remotely than being in the office. Those missed conversations around the coffee machine, the water cooler. So the suggestion is also to establish a set of engagement principles to facilitate more of a leadership presence. And this is important because, as I say, we're working more remotely. And we must find ways to recreate that that informal work mentoring opportunities that existed in the office and possibly are no longer there since we've been working remotely or very hard to tap into. So we need to be empowered. Senior members need to make sure that others have the opportunity to give their insight and how that reaches the most junior colleagues and those from underrepresented communities.
You've touched on this one, actually, the stats for themselves on the lack of women in senior leadership position. I think that gets even worse when you look at Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. What would you say is the most common obstacle women face when trying to rise through the ranks of their careers? And do you have any advice on how to overcome those?
Yeah. So just to give a few some statistics. So women currently make up just under 52% of those on the roll in the solicitor profession, but only 31% of partners in firms. So there's a clear disparity there, and the numbers are even more stark when you then break it down into ethnicity. And just to put it into context, in 1978 there were 5,000 women solicitors on the roll, compared to, as I say, in 2019, just over 52%. In 1990, there were 709 solicitors from a Black, Asian, minority, ethnic background, compared to 20,000 in 2019. But the most pervasive barrier that needs to be overcome by women, as they reported, was unconscious bias. So the previous president, Christina Blackklaws, did much work around gender inequality. And part of that work was as to what the greatest obstacle was unconscious bias. But worryingly, 11% of individuals reported that there were no visible steps being taken to address their concerns. So there's much talk about training to address unconscious bias, but it needs to be compulsory and ongoing, and include those in senior leadership positions. It's got to include everybody. Everybody's got to be part of the discussion, and it's important to ensure proper processes are in place with a view to eliminating unconscious bias from recruitment and selection processes. There is also the prevailing issue of equal pay, with pay differentials exceeding the national average for women, and indeed, the ethnicity pay gap also. So we encouraged firms and organizations, legal businesses, to report on their gender pay gap, ethnicity pay gaps, but including at partner level, so that disparities can be identified and plans put in place to address them.
Yeah, I mean, unconscious bias, I mean, that's something I've thought about a lot, and a lot of people saying that's a barrier, and I absolutely see that. And I always think, but how can you resolve that issue? Because training only takes you so far. The person has to recognize their biases, put them on the table, and deal with them in order to advance. And I suppose, therefore, that action, that next step, needs to be taken and addressed to really get to the bottom of unconscious bias. I mean, one of the things that I have found very useful is having a sponsor. So a person is actually personally invested in my personal development and progression. And so I always say to people, choose a sponsor that gives you perspective, insight, and is prepared to challenge you. And if you do see unconscious biases, you know what? Call them out. I always have those frank discussions. Sorry, Stephanie.
No, sorry. Absolutely. But, one of the things I left out earlier was you mentioned sponsors and mentors. But, if you haven't come from that background, so my idea around teaching law in school, in order to get people familiar with some of those nuances, if you like, that exist, is that they can tap into those networks, find a sponsor, a mentor at an earlier stage, rather than a later stage. And really, because some people say, well, we don't know how to network. So they access the networks, but they don't know how to, maneuver within those networks, because that perhaps is an art within itself. So absolutely, but a mentor and a sponsor are invaluable. Have I had mentors, sponsors? I think, there have been people who have advocated for me, known and unknown, people who, even to this day, I have a body of individuals who I can call on. So not a formal mentoring, if you like, but I believe that every single day we must learn something new. Life is constantly about evolving, and we must take the opportunity to learn something new every single day. So there's, as I say, a body of individuals who I call on, take advice from, and you need that support. You absolutely need that support and guidance. It's invaluable.
I get asked quite a lot, who inspires me? And I know there are so many amazing women out there, but for me, my inspiration has always been closer to home. That's been my mom. Is there a woman who inspires you, either personally or professionally, and why?
Well, can I say firstly that there are plenty of people who inspire me, and the list is so long that I'd probably be here all day. But every person, every individual I meet inspires me to keep going, inspires me to do something different, you know. But I recently did an interview and I was asked the question about my role model. And for me, when I was growing up, as a young black child growing up in rural Buckinghamshire, as it was then, aspiring and wanting to be a lawyer, there weren't many role models around, on TV, in my neighborhood, in my home, other than my mother. So I then said, that my role model at that time was Margaret Thatcher. Now, I don't agree and do not agree with what she later went on to do and her policies and so forth. But when I was growing up, and the reason why I cited her as my role model is because Margaret Thatcher was she was a barrister. She was the first. She was the education minister, and she was our first female prime minister. And that's what I saw growing up, and that's what I, wanted to aspire to. But there are lots of people, as I say, I come from a very supportive family. My mother, my father, my mother's my biggest champion. Uh, um, yeah, but lots of people who inspire me.
Great. So the theme for International Women's Day is choose to challenge. What would you choose to challenge?
Every challenge you face today makes you stronger tomorrow. And that is absolutely true. So when you follow your inner voice, doors open when they appear closed at first. So we choose to challenge the narrow perspective that doesn't look at the bigger picture and doesn't allow equity of opportunity, equity of progression, and our right to belong. So I choose to challenge that.
We're very similar actually, because I would choose to challenge change takes time, because we're talking about fairness, equality, and that's equality of opportunity as well. So
Absolutely.
please don't tell me that fairness, equality takes time. Tell me, talk to me about your commitment to drive real change through action. All that now remains is for me to say a huge and a heartfelt thank you to Stephanie, and for amazing insights and honesty. It's been fantastic. Thank you. If I was to conclude, what would I say? It is clear that progress has been made. We still have a way to go. We need to go further, and we need to go faster. As the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who fought tirelessly for gender equality, said, women belong in all places where decisions are being made. I don't say the split should be 50-50. It could be 60% men, 40% women, or the other way around. It shouldn't be that women are the exception. A very happy International Women's Day, and thank you very much for listening.